Hi, this is the Drupal usability meeting for February 5th, 2019. And we have a lot of things to look at, and people will arrive to discuss them. But I think Angie wanted to have some discussion about who our competitors are. What's the target audience for looking for competitors?
Hi, was not counting on going first, so I just got soup. Hello, everyone.
Right.
Yeah, so I work at Acquia, and one of the things that I'm going to be working on over the next couple of months is what's called a competitive teardown of Drupal. And a competitive teardown means that we go really deep into the details of a couple of given competitors of a product. So we've done this before for other Acquia products, like our cloud product, and done that against some of its competitors. So this is one for Drupal itself. And so I thought it would be good to get the community's kind of feedback on, I mean, Acquia is going to do whatever they're going to do, but I think it would be good to get the community's feedback, since ideally whatever comes out of this would be shared in some form publicly and become, data that's available to the community. So I thought it'd be good to talk about what might work and what might not work for that. So basically what we want to do, like Drupal itself has like a billion different target audiences, like it's for developers, it's for people who don't want a CMS at all and they just want a backend for a front end thing. It's for people who are non-technical and they just want something to quickly, put together something, and they don't want to code. They just want to click it together with views and CCK and stuff like that. So Drupal has a lot of different audiences. People are new to Drupal. People have been using Drupal a while. And the first thing we need to do as part of this competitive teardown is to limit that whole scope down to, a single target audience or target market, so that we can pick 3 competitors in that space. So say we said our target audience is people who know web development stuff but are not yet enterprise level. Then we might, for example, choose WordPress as one of the things we try. We might, choose something like something like Squarespace. I don't know, something in that range. But if we were saying, no, we're targeting hardcore developers who know their way around really well, we might target something completely different, like say Contentful or Symfony CMF or something like that. So I think that's the first question I had, is if people have thoughts about, of all the possible people that we could target this around, who it should be. And then the next phase is going to be selecting up to 3 competitors in that space, finding people who know a lot about, some people who know both Drupal and that competitor, and some people who don't know Drupal at all and only know that competitor, and doing a bunch of user interviews, doing some detailed functional analysis, and getting like a little product matrix chart and some other stuff out of this. So it's an exciting project, and I'm really looking forward to working on it as a product manager kind of person. But I just wanted to know if anybody had any thoughts about that, or if I just confused you all with what I just talked about, and so on. So I'll stop talking and see if people have thoughts. Stunned silence.
I have opinions, but
Sure.
I don't know.
Opinions.
So one of the challenges is, I think, trying to reach the largest target audience that is effective in using Drupal. I mean, I would try and see how you could get the most bang for your buck, is what I'd recommend. So I don't know if there is data that would help identify who is most likely to be looking at a competitive teardown and would effectively use it to make decisions. And I think the other thing is, it would be really nice to see a comparison of real world ways of looking at the application. I know, like, to a developer's eyes, that's going to be radically different than what it would look like to a decision maker who's going to decide to fund a project using Drupal. But it would, personally, I'd love to see a comparison of editorial or content generator experiences across competitors, because there's a lot of opinion that I've run across, but I don't know how much has been like hard fact. This is the experience, and this is what it's like here, here, and here. So those are things I would like to see.
So kind of aiming for like the widest target audience we can hit, which is probably not hardcore developers, probably more people like, is it content authors then? Like people who would use Drupal and once it's set up, or would it be the implementers who actually set up Drupal? Like what in your mind is that focus?
The editors and content generators would be the largest group in companies that I know of, who if they saw something that looked really effective, they could use it, because the decision makers at the top would be able to understand that information. And I don't know many developers who are going to make a do or die decision based upon a competitive breakdown. Like the really techie people are not necessarily going to make their decision based upon what may be viewed as marketing copy.
Yeah, makes sense. Other thoughts? Myself, I could go kind of either way. I could definitely go with content authors and then pitting Drupal up against stuff that has a really great content authoring interface. And maybe an enterprise thing in there too, like Adobe Experience Manager or something like that. I could also see targeting the implementers though, because Drupal doesn't tend to get into organizations at the moment anyway, without like a kind of a Drupal champion being there somehow. So the more Drupal champions we grow, the more Drupal gets infiltrated into organizations and used. But it all depends on the organizational hierarchy and who actually makes the decisions, because to your point, a lot of times, at the very least, the content authors will be consulted in any decision about what system is used, because they are the poor suckers who have to use it every day. So it's important that they're on board with whatever technology choice is made. So cool. Any other thoughts, opinions? And if not, that's okay. I just wanted to say, you know, at least it's out there. And if people have things to talk about and opinions about it, that's fine. I don't actually know what process we're going to use to figure this out. If it's going to be the product managers get together, if it's going to be something else. But I thought it would be useful to, you know, since this is a diverse community group with, you know, people who both do and do not work for Acquia on it, I thought it would be good to poll the audience a little bit. So I guess if there's no other thoughts, we can move to the next topic.
All right. Thank you. So Jennifer had a blocking issue for the help module.
Okay, this is not a blocking issue for the help module. This is something for the user guide.
All right, sorry.
Anyway, I'll paste the issue link in here. It's also in Slack. Let's see, when did I post it? 3 hours ago. Anyway, it says here's a usability issue. So here's the deal. It's kind of a quick one.
Just for the recording, we would like to have it read out loud. 2900409.
Okay, great. Yeah, so it's issue number 2900409. It's a Drupal core issue. So what happened is when we were building the user guide, I run tests every time we have a new version of Drupal, and we found out that something had changed, and this was sometime around Drupal 8.2 or 8.3, so this has been around a little while. And what happened is that if you change, you know, on a content type, you can edit the content type so that you have a custom field label for the title when you're editing or adding content. So if you create like a recipe content type and call the title field recipe name and change it, have a vendor content type and make the title field label be vendor name, and then you go to add a reference field that's a content reference type, it'll show up either as when you scroll down in the settings to the sort by, it'll show up always as vendor name or always as recipe name, even though you're trying to add a node reference field to some other content type. So it's really confusing. So like let's say you're trying to add a vendor reference field and the sort by field shows recipe name instead. It's really confusing. Like, what is the recipe name for a vendor content item? So the problem is that the code that's making the select list for the sort by setting is kind of assuming that all of the field labels for a given field, in this case the title field, are the same for all across all of the bundles of all the content types, and that's not the case in this instance, and it might not be the case for other things. So what I'm proposing is, if you look at the issue, I've got a screenshot there. What I'm proposing to do is find all of the labels that people have used for a given field and just sort of separating them by vertical bars so that at least you can see something that makes some sense. So instead of, when you're making a vendor reference field, instead of the title showing up as recipe name, it'll show up as vendor name or recipe name. And if you also had like just a basic page in there, you might see the word title as well, because you might not have changed the field label for the title field there. Does this make any sense at all? So anyway, so my question is that a good way to go about it? And if not, is there something better that we can actually do? Because I don't know how to find the original label. And if it's a field that somebody added using the field UI module, then there's no sort of base label for it. You know, if somebody labeled it main image in one field and picture in another content type, the same field, you'd want both of those names to show up as a sort by. That's my question is this a good way to go about it? And if there's any other ideas.
So you're talking about the problem when different bundles have different labels for the same field.
Exactly. And the common case of that is the title field, because you can very easily change the title field when you're editing a content type.
Sure, but what about the opposite problem where different fields have the same label? That's also possible, isn't it?
Yep. That would be a problem too. Then it would show up twice in the list and you wouldn't know which one you were getting.
So the only thing you can really count on is the machine name of the field, right?
Correct. But we don't like to use machine names in user interfaces.
I've had this problem before. I'm wondering though, especially with sites that have just maybe like 20 content types, what happens to that list? Would it just be truncated if there's more than, say, if it reaches like 50 characters or something? Or?
Right. I don't know what will happen if it gets too long. And also, there's also a problem that if you've got like 20 content types on your site, that list is going to show every field that appears in every content type. That's what the code does now.
Yeah, potentially we could. It'd be very tricky. We could look at like non-exposed filters if they're hard filtering on one bundle or two bundles. They could tell, but with contextual filters and stuff, it's just really confusing.
Yeah, well, if you, just above where it's obscured in my screenshot there, but just above there, you get to choose one or more content types to filter to using checkboxes. But you do have the ability to allow the reference field to reference multiple different content types. But there's no filtering on the sort by. There's no dynamic filtering. It basically, that sort by list is created when the form is put up there, and it just has all the fields from all of the content types in the select list. So anyway, I don't know if my solution is any good. You're right. I mean, if there were 20 content types with 20 different names for the title, then that would be too long to deal with.
I know that I've run into it a lot with the date field, even more than title.
Okay.
And it's forced me to use the same name on each of them. Maybe there is a way to set a global name that gets enforced, or you can choose only one. I'd be concerned about the scalability of just trying to arbitrarily concatenate a list of names.
Yep, that's a good point. So another place where this comes up is in views, but in that case, when you're adding a field, it's not from a select list, and so they can put, there's a scrolling list, and they can put some description underneath that says, also known as this, that, and the other thing. But they don't do that with the title, as I don't think. But in a select list, we don't have the ability to put help text underneath each selection. The other problem with this list is it's never been alphabetized. That was not introduced by my patch.
Would it be possible to do something other than a select list?
Well, that's a good question.
I mean, I like the solution that you have better than what's there currently. I mean, maybe we could do if we're running into it has more than 5 different labels, either not do it or truncate it. I don't know. I feel like we have to cover that case. The other thing, maybe this could be a follow-up or a totally different issue, would be to Ajax refresh that list to filter by bundles if you've checked in there.
Yeah.
Because I think it would also be really nice to narrow that down. The fields that we know are possible.
Would it be possible to, instead of concatenating the names, add each name to the list and next to it put the machine name or some signifier that indicates commonalities, so that vendor name and recipe name would be one after the other or somewhere in the list, but you would know that they're related?
It's not really possible because behind the scenes, I mean, these are the labels for the select options, but behind the scenes, the actual machine name is what's being selected. So you can't have the same entry in there twice. Like, behind where it says vendor name or recipe name, behind the scenes, the option that you're actually selecting is the machine name title.
Right.
So you can't have that in there, that machine name in the select list multiple times, I don't think. Can you?
I mean, we could, especially if you massaged it afterwards, but I think having it more than once would get the impression that it's not the same thing.
Right.
Well, that's why there would have to be some means of identifying it. Like, it could even be like vendor name parentheses 1, or and then recipe name parentheses 1. So anything that was related to other things had some signifier to identify it in the list as being related, because they'd use the same machine name.
Can you have multiple options in a select list with the same underlying?
Even if you can't, I mean, we could do something on Submit where, just feel like we could put a value in there, like some machine name colon something that we're going to ignore, basically. And
yeah, I guess we could. Yeah.
I don't know if we could maybe, I guess another option would be to do the first label that we find, and then on subsequent rows, like indent them to somehow show that it's kind of like the same selection, because effectively it's the same selection.
Yeah.
I don't think we can use option groups because I ran into another issue and they're not like accessible for screen users or something, I think. So we can't like group them, I don't think.
Is there a way to set word wrapping on select lists? Because that would solve the problem of having something that was too long if it kind of wrapped and indented automatically or something.
Actually, I don't know what it does when you do a really long one.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I mean, that might be something to check. I mean, maybe it just takes care of it and it wouldn't look so bad. I don't know. I
don't think it does. And it's probably dependent on a browser too, because, I mean, the select list would probably just have some text in it, and then the browser would have the option to do whatever it wanted with it.
I'd be concerned about mobile interfaces.
Yep. I don't know how many people configure their fields on mobile, but anyway.
True.
So, I mean, we could avoid all of this by just always using the machine name and not putting the labels in.
Yeah, I really think we have to get over this aversion to using machine names, because everything else we're suggesting is sort of making things more complicated. What you're actually choosing here is, I guess, a field storage, although I'm not recommending that we use that in the interface. But then we're labeling it by field, and it's just opening us up for confusion.
Right, and like, who was it? You who said that? What happens if two fields have the same label?
Right.
You can't decide between them with this user interface.
So if we want to say label paren machine name close paren, I'm just as happy with that as machine name paren label close paren.
Okay, so here
I think we should have one item per machine name, and it should indicate the machine name.
Here's a thought. We could make it machine name and then put the label in parentheses. And if we have more than one label, then we could put comma dot 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 or something like that to indicate, oh, there are other labels that this has in some content types.
I think that would be an improvement. Go ahead.
My concern is one of the key Drupalisms is machine names can't be changed after they're created. So there have been a significant number of times where I've obfuscated the fact that we've had to go through iterations of use on a given field because it was populated with content and the label name has changed, but the machine name is something that I may not want the world to see or may not want other site builders to see.
Remember, this is on a settings field for a field. Reference field. Settings page for a reference field. So this is an admin thing. I hear your concern, but I'm not as concerned about it because you know about it anyway.
Or another way to put it, this is a site builder's screen. This is not a content editor's screen.
Exactly.
Right. It's I've just run into situations where, let's say a consultant built something and hands it off to a company. It's when you have change over in the site builder, machine names can be confusing if there have been significant change. If there's a significant change over time in the label name or use of the field, that's the only concern. And I can understand that it's a compromise that has to be made.
Well, if we have both the machine name and the label on there, I'm not set on which one being in parentheses.
Yes,
that kind of solves that problem.
Yes, I agree.
All right, well, I'll make another patch and put the machine name and then in parentheses the label, and if there are multiple labels, make it say dot 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 or something like that. I'll try that. We can see what it looks like. We may all hate it. But maybe a few of you can follow the issue and continue to review the patches.
Yep, following it. Thanks. This is a confusing issue. I mean, a confusing existing problem.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, I'll update the issue and add the comments that we talked about here. The other main comment being what if it gets too long of a list, and also we have an additional problem of two fields with the same label would show up in the list twice with different. That would be confusing as well. So on that, I'll make another patch.
Did you put? We don't have to make the issue there, but maybe we could do a suggestion as a follow-up to filter that list down based on bundles.
Oh yeah, selection. I don't think I want to do it in this issue, but I'll add that as a suggestion for follow-up.
Okay, cool. Yeah, unrelated, sort of not unrelated, but follow-up.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I believe Emily has an issue that we should discuss if it's a stability blocker for Layout Builder or not. Or if Emily is not back yet, in that case, Christina has issues that she wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I can talk until she comes back. And then we can jump into the other issue.
Yes, please.
Okay, so the issue that I was talking is an ideas issue in the one in the an issue in the ideas queue. The thing is, we've picked or we are kind of reusing a previous issue to create a content editor or an editor role by default on the standard profile, because the history is that from the issue posted a while ago asking for directional feedback for the admin UI, one of the points that came up there was that ideally we should have the editor role by default in the Drupal standard profile, and then also create some things for the editor role like a menu and so on. So instead of moving forward without asking to the community, we've just kind of dated this issue with some proposals and some possible steps to move it. And we've got some feedback from people, and mainly I would say that people is in favor of doing it, but the main problem is that we are kind of detecting that there are like two roles that could be added. One will be a content editor, and the other will be more like a manager or something that has more advanced permissions. And the discussion now will be what are the minimum roles for the editor, because the main problem that we can have here is that we add permissions and then a lot of people don't know that they are there, and it can create conflicts, like for example having an editor that can delete other people's content type, or for example giving the permission, if we say the menus are content, giving to an editor the permission to manage menus, and then this editor can actually delete the admin menu, so it can have security implications. So I would say that 2 points that we need to figure out is if it's only one role that we need to add, and if we can add some things with it, like for example these new permissions to manage menus, for example, and so on. And I don't really know exactly the process. If, for example, there's an existing module that I'm going to share the screen. If there's an existing menu that does something like that, because, for example, one of the suggestions was the menu admin per menu. And this is a contrib module that it's actually not a huge module. Mainly what it does is it creates a new set of permissions where you can actually, it's just like per content type, you can give permissions, and it will be like that. For menu, you can give permissions to each role. So what will be the steps to actually propose this contrib or something, or this functionality for Drupal core? So what are your thoughts about this? Yes, sorry, and the issue number is 27033367.
I feel guilty. I've been speaking a lot, but I have a lot of opinions in this. If anyone else wants to talk first, I'll go last.
Go ahead.
One of the I love the idea of including editor. For the advanced permissions beyond that, the most common role I've seen that's differentiated from editor is someone who can publish. So a differentiation between people who can change the content and people who can publish. Dividing those is the most common use case I've personally experienced. And something that's often forgotten in dealing with the editorial process is that a lot of editors need access to taxonomy. And so there are taxonomy implications because editors frequently manage lists of terms in the taxonomy.
Right. That's right.
But the way I think about it is because they can be stacked on top of one another, the publisher role could be given to someone who also has the editorial, so they don't have to duplicate one another. You can focus on the types of, I would focus for each role on the types of activities that would seem appropriate. So a manager or a publisher what types of things would they do that you wouldn't want to put into the editorial role? It's sort of like a super user type role. And an editorial tends to be more content related.
So one will be mainly the one creating content, you said, and the other publishing or managing it? I'm just trying to get everything noted to post it later.
I think that's probably the easiest paradigm to follow because you have the anonymous people who visit versus authenticated users, but you don't want to necessarily assume that either of them have content generation rights, whereas editorial will almost certainly have content generation rights, but they would also have certain workflow management rights, but they would be limited. They'd be specific actions. And typically I would not include delete in anything but the highest level. So either admin or publisher, but I wouldn't give delete other content generators rights on the lower levels.
But at least for your content?
Yes, you should be able to delete your own content, usually. And if it's a special use case, if someone wants to block that, and then you just would modify the roles because you don't want to make them too complex. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I would avoid duplication where you would say that in the editor role and the publisher role, I would make certain that they were distinct sets, and that if someone wanted to have both abilities, you would add both roles rather than having to go through and continuously A/B compare them. And see that there was partial overlap, and then you'd have to figure out what wasn't overlapping.
Makes sense. So my concern here is that in general, a lot of the sites will have these two roles, but my concern is that we create more things that the minimum is than the minimum required. I mean, having discussions that maybe there's going to be a lot of people that don't need this, and that's so I think we really need people's feedback here to at least have an idea of what's expected there. I would say it makes sense, but
have you talked to distribution maintainers? Because it seems like they would be in a similar, or not similar, but I mean, they're often going against the general audience, but maybe setting up roles more than Drupal 4 does.
Makes a lot of sense.
Anybody else is like I feel like anybody else sort of falls into a particular use case, maybe in development, or I mean, nobody does like, once you start developing sites, I feel like to some extent you start to narrow down your focus. So, but like a generalized distribution maybe has a similar problem where they want to not assume too much.
That's a great idea. Thank you.
So I think also if you want to add a role for publisher, you could make that depend on having the content moderation module or the workflows module, whatever it's called. Because I think a lot of sites wouldn't need that.
Exactly.
But most sites that do enable workflows would probably want something like that.
Yeah.
I think that's great. And actually, this is what I was trying to describe earlier when Angie asked her question about the competitive breakdown. I'm really curious how other significant competitors to Drupal, what the editorial process is like, because my users, that's the #1 complaint I've gotten over the past 8 or 10 years is they don't like the way we manage content. So if we can solve that problem, it would go a long way towards making me happy.
So when you mean manage content, it's there are other things like apart from the permissions. What else?
I think it's out of scope for what we're talking about in terms of the other editorial stuff. But in this situation, having those roles and then using the suggestion of tying it to like a publisher permission set or permissions role or a publisher role to using the workflow module. It's treating it in terms of saying like Drupal in this mode, when someone's using a more complex editorial process, this is going to be the expected experience, and making certain that content generator experience and the editorial experience is consistent. And by defining those roles, it allows us to define a pattern for how we expect that to be, so that people can then design how they want around it. It's so unopinionated that you have to put a whole lot of Legos together to try and generate something that a lot of other software just says, this is the way you're going to do it, and this is what you can do. And that's where I run into problems.
Okay. Thanks. Any other ideas? So in general, the other people, what do you think about adding 2 roles instead of 1? Apart of being more work to discuss.
So the proposal is a content author and a what kind of role? What would be the 2 roles?
I see it more like a manager or content manager or a publishing role. They were saying, I'm not really good at names, especially in English, but it's kind of the person that actually can delete other people's content. It can actually, I don't know, probably manage users and other stuff that only creating and publishing the own content and deleting the own content. So, for example, I don't know where will rely the menu administration, for example, if it will be only on the publisher, or the editor should have permissions for the menu too. So my concern is that we try to do too much, but if we are doing it, let's do it right. So if it's needed, maybe it's important to talk that.
Yeah, I'm just a little worried because all of that is correct. That's a huge use case of particularly enterprise sites where they need like to separate those roles. As in, you
Exactly.
are who can only create content. You are a mega peon who can't maintain the site, but you can still, you know, cause havoc in a smaller part of the site. My worry, though, is that it drastically increases the complexity of the out-of-the-box experience.
Yeah.
And we're trying to keep the out-of-the-box experience of Drupal as simple as possible. Also, for single user blogs and stuff like that, which granted Drupal is not really used for as much anymore, but a lot of people start using Drupal with that, you know, like, oh, I got a little
No.
thing for my own website, or I need to put something up for my kid's school or something like that. It enforces a certain workflow that doesn't make sense in that sort of use case.
Exactly.
So I don't know about that. I think what we should probably do is summarize the points made here in the issue and probably discuss it a little bit more. But I personally kind of lean towards that being like a distro like Open Publish or something. I could completely see that shipping with both tiers of those roles. But for core, I don't know.
Yeah.
If we did want to do that, I think we'd have to make a bunch of other decisions. For example, making the workflow module enabled by default, setting up publishing workflows that work with those two roles by default. And the problem and the blessing with defaults is that if you deviate from them, you need to have a very good reason to do so, which means we're giving people a lot to grapple with in order to even understand what Drupal does. And so that's, I guess, what the concern is. But I don't want to, you know, obviously, Thomas actually deals with end users and building sites and all that kind of stuff, whereas I'm a lot more removed from that. So I want to keep that in mind as well. But basically, I think we've gotten one, really good opinion on why it should be like that. We've got another opinion on why it shouldn't be like that, like simplicity and 80% use cases and blah, blah, blah. So why don't we throw it back to the issue, discuss it a little bit longer, and bring it up again in a week or two when we feel like that's had some more eyeballs. I'm happy to tweet about it too to get some more people in there if that's helpful.
That would be great, having more eyes there and more opinions.
Thomas, are you comfortable with that as an
100%. I would modify like my position to simply say I like the idea of an authoring role and an editorial role to give them two names, but they would only get enabled if you enabled the workflow module. So essentially, out of the box, if workflow is not enabled, then those permission sets or roles wouldn't show up. But if you enabled the workflow, you could start to standardize the way workflow interacts. And I don't know if people will like that, but that would be my position, is that the workflow module as is, there's a lot of work to make it functional. And this would give us something to rally around. And then potentially you could duplicate an editorial role and then split them up into 15 different editorial roles. But that would be what people like a site builder or developer would do. But giving them the examples linked to using the workflow module then means the simplest use case of not having that installed, they would never see those two roles. Those two roles would become visible when you installed the module.
Yeah, the only risk with that is that you need the workflow module even to just get draft, and way more people need draft as a concept.
Yeah.
Need the entirety of configurable work states and, roles and permissions around those workflow states and stuff like that. Like that, I would be all for that if workflow were in fact an advanced feature, but it's really not. It's really a very basic feature that can also be made into a complex one. And so that's what's hard about that.
So then maybe rather than two roles, simply combining them all into one single role. And again, talking about it is the right course. I think getting community feedback is much more important than me elaborating. So
yeah, let's get more feedback. But I think you've made a strong case for why we need some kind of guardrails or something to help people. So if they are in that position, they make good decisions. Because otherwise, yeah, they're going to take the one role that's there and try to turn it into the all-encompassing role, and then they're going to have a bunch of contractor publishers accidentally deleting all of the, press releases, or you know what I mean? Like, we don't want that to happen. So, but it's very good food for thought stuff. But Yeah. So anyway, let's discuss it more, because I think this could benefit from a few more opinions, particularly from people who actually interact with content authors on a day-to-day basis and know pitfalls and stuff like that to worry about. But thank you, Thomas.
Does Umami set up multiple roles? I'm wondering if that would be a good place to start, because then we could at least like show best practices.
Umami actually, for what they said in the issue, they have the author and the editor. The author is the one that creates the content, and the editor is the one that manages the content.
Okay, great.
So they were actually saying that if we were going to have a role named editor, that they will have to change their profile or their whatever they have.
Yeah, I think a lot of sites are going to be in that boat. It's like editor is that's like the most common sense thing to call it. So we probably need to be concerned about an upgrade path no matter what. Unless we're going to name ours something silly just to avoid that. But I'd rather it be called something sensible and then deal with the legacy issue than call it like content manipulator or something. Lots of things we could do, but like, let's not introduce complexity while trying to simplify Drupal, you know? So.
Yeah, makes sense. That's another point. Great. Okay, it's been super useful. Thank you all, because those are very good thoughts. So if you can publish later the link to the recording, it will be great, so I don't forget any comment. So that's one thing, and another super fast, because Emily has time for reviewing the layout issue, is a link that I sent some minutes ago. It's as a consequence of that issue that I was saying about the directional feedback for the admin UI. Another point that was made was trying to get into core or to assess some country modules to manage the entity reference options. For example, trying to get closer to core on the entity browser and the inline entity form. And I'm not really sure if there's actually any initiative like media that is trying to get that done. That's what I'm not really sure. Do you have any idea about that? The modules are inline entity browser and entity browser and inline entity form.
Right now, the media library is not using them.
Okay.
I don't know that there's push to. So for media library, obviously inline uniform would have been very useful in that, but I think like it's a very, like to make it generalized is super complicated. So bringing in the ability to add the media without inline uniform is just a lot simpler. I mean, I like inline uniform, but yeah, I haven't heard of any initiative to get that in recently.
Okay.
I know both of those have been on the wish list for a while, along with some other ones like field collection and stuff like that. But so far, no one has risen to the challenge to get them in a place where they could be core worthy. So currently, anyway, those are not. They're not formally part of any initiative. They touch a few different initiatives, like media. The media library module is kind of taking entity browser and then kind of taking enough of it that they can do what it needs to do for the media library and like that kind of thing, but it's not going to be quite comprehensive. But could always be layered on top of, for sure. And I don't remember exactly what the rationale was for why they went with that. If it was like It was something, it was basically like the contrib stuff was way too complex for what they needed it. And they needed something simple enough that we could stabilize it within the next 6 to 12 months. So,
Okay.
so
Yeah,
anyway,
so
it
it's
would probably be more like a Drupal 9 thing at this point, I'm guessing, unless some
yeah.
warrior comes out of the mists of time and says, this is going to be my project for the next little bit. That would be amazing.
Yeah, but so what will be that process if we want that modules or their functionality into core to build above that for the admin UI? What should we do?
Yeah, so well, there as far as I know, there's idea queue issues for all of those. So step one is to get like product manager sign off, which I think will not be a problem. I mean, inline entity form is way better for a usability thing. Entity browser seems like a great idea. But then the trick is somebody needs to come up with a plan, like a detailed plan of like how they would go about implementing it. And that is where you need someone technical to kind of go through the issue queues of both of those modules, figure out what the technical debt is, figure out what the current outstanding bugs are, that kind of stuff, and then come up with a plan of, are we moving this wholesale into core? If we are, we probably need to stabilize the contrib module first. Are we picking and cherry picking things from here to make a slim down thing that does 80% of the work with 20% of the code, or like what exactly is going on here? And then that would need to go through a framework manager kind of review to make sure it was sane and made sense.
Okay.
And then once that was done, then it just quote unquote write the code. but it would be good. I would caution anyone against like, oh, we'll just throw that module in core, because when things go into core, they become like quote unquote enterprise ready. So that means they need unit test coverage of all of the things. They need to conform to all the standards. They need to be tested for performance and accessibility and all that, which a lot of times stuff in contrib isn't. So I'd say if you're interested in that, the best thing you could probably do is fix up the contrib module, because whether it is in core or not, that's going to make things much better, and it will pave the way much easier to get into core later. So like JSON API, for example, is hopefully going into core this release, but they've been working on stabilizing that module in contrib since like last year. So
okay. At least I know what to do now. Perfect. Thanks. So sorry, I just let you 3 minutes for the layout thing, Emily. Sorry.
It's okay. Yes, so the issue that I wanted to check in on, we reviewed 2 weeks ago in the usability meeting for the designs, and now mostly I wanted to see what people's opinions are on whether they think that this is needed for Layout Builder to be stable, or whether this is more of a nice to have in the future. So I'll paste the issue in the chat too for the video.
Also read out the issue number, please.
Yes, it's 293-8182.
So from the title, it sounds pretty important. Is it possible to give us, in 2 minutes, is it possible to give us some screenshots or a demo or something of what it looks like now?
Sure. The screenshots are, what it looks like perfect. Now. Yeah, so the main change here that we're discussing is that grayed out background. So right now, the background, it's not grayed out, and at the moment, contextual links for all of the outside blocks are also accessible, but we have a different issue to remove those. So the question is, does removing the contextual links for all of the blocks outside of the main content area solve the immediate problem? And if it does, then we could address the overall visual issue later.
So just as a little more background, so the removing contextual links outside the layout builder is sort of like so you don't really mess up your site. Like basically you're on the layout for an override and you think, oh, well, over here I have configure block for the menu, and I'll remove that from the layout, not knowing one is not related to the other. So if we stop you from doing that, at least you can't, start to edit blocks that are outside the layout, thinking they were inside the layout.
Right. We hit this with quick edit as well, where we needed to like turn off links everywhere else so you didn't navigate to somewhere stupid that you shouldn't be. So it's definitely much clearer with the background change because it indicates to the user immediately what they can and can't edit on the page. Because a lot of people, when they think layout, think the entire browser window from the top left to the bottom right. And this is a really easy visual cue to be like, no. So you're pushing back on this being a stable blocker because it's really hard. Like it's harder. There's more to it than you thought there would be. Is that kind of the problem? Or?
Well, right now we're having a discussion about accessibility and ways to build this out in an accessible way and whether or not this is a good solution from an accessibility perspective.
Got it. Okay. So Andrew's concerned that this is introducing a new UI pattern of like basically ignore this stuff. And we can't just reuse the modal stuff for some reason.
So the concern that Andrew expressed was that that would be a dialogue, and there's also the dialogue for settings tray that would be open at the same time. And it sounds like there are concerns about having dialogues within dialogues. Andrew is concerned that people can normally navigate using other menus outside of the main content area. And if this pattern was used, they wouldn't be able to access any menus outside of the main content area.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm also curious if people here think that it would be a good UX pattern to have everything outside of the main content area disabled. Before, everyone generally agreed that that sounded like a good idea, but given the feedback, I just wanted to check on that too.
Yeah, I mean, for sighted users, this seems fine because you wouldn't even try and click on the stuff that's grayed out probably, but I can see how it would create a problem for accessibility. I'm wondering if we could still do a visual affordance that doesn't get us into like, trouble with, I understand, yeah, double dialogues and, how to handle the menu and all that stuff. I can understand this is probably a dumb idea, but what if this page were all white like it normally is, but you had like some kind of a dash line situation, kind of like you have around ad section and ad block, maybe thicker, I don't know, but like that around the content area so people could see what it is they're editing. So it's basically nothing more than Chrome. There was no behavioral change whatsoever. I don't know if that would at least be something though. Because I still don't know how people are going to find that save button. You know what I mean? The save button is in a weird place, not where we ever put a save button. If the page just looks like a normal page, because then it's just going to be kind of arbitrarily kind of a third of the way down. Versus now, with the way it looks, it's like right at the top, more or less, of the area that's clickable. Anyway, I don't want to throw like 60 hours of arguing with the accessibility team in front of this feature, because this feature is really important for Drupal. So I guess I'd be okay with this slipping to a strong should have, if you will. I'd like to get Gabor's and anyone else's thought on that too. It would be great if there was some kind of visual affordance we could do, though, that doesn't run into all the concerns of the accessibility team. Because I worry if you don't have that grayed outness and you do disable the menus, you're going to run into very confused people who are like, what? How come I can't click on this link? Click, 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 click. You know what I mean? They're going to be very confused about that.
So at the moment, they'll still be able to click on the menu links. They just won't see the contextual links pop up anymore.
I see. So they'll still be able to click on recipes or whatever that says.
Right.
But they won't be able to get the contextual links to edit that menu in place.
Right.
Okay. it's still,
And yeah, so the question that I guess I have for the UX team is, do we think that we need a larger visual affordance before stable?
I mean, I wonder if we could do the suggestion that Angie had, where we put some sort of stronger border outside of the area that layout builder affects, while we push for the design and try to get it accessible for the screenshots that are there. Whereas then if we get that to where it's not an accessibility problem, then we switch to the grayed out version or something, or whatever we end up with. But if there was something like a border.
Yeah, the main thing you want to try to do by the time it's stable is get the UI looking how you kind of want it to look. Because once it's stable, that's the signal to the documentation team to take a bunch of screenshots, write a bunch of documentation. It's a signal through companies that provide training videos to like make a video about the thing. So if you drastically change the way it looks after stable, that is not ideal. People have to retrain all their users again. They have to retake screenshots. They have to redo videos. So while it's experimental, it's not a problem for it to look different between one release and another. But wow, that was cool. That was very cool. But ideally, it would not change dramatically unless we're like working on kind of a 2.0 version of it, which would come with other things as well as visual changes. So that's the only reason I'm kind of like about it, because it's really nice looking what's here. But if it, you know what I mean. So ideally, it would look like that, but not if it's going to add 6 months to the implementation time.
So I guess the biggest question then is, overall, from a UX perspective, do we agree that it's better for users to disable the area outside of the area that we're editing for the layout? And then do we think that we need a visual affordance to make that clear?
So I think the grayed out background is already a very clear visual signifier. And what I think we discussed 2 weeks ago is that once you've made that visual signifier, to be consistent with that, you should disable all clicks in the grayed out area. People don't expect to be able to interact with something that's been grayed out like that.
Or maybe the moment that you click on the gray out, you just disable the gray out.
Right, and then the accessibility issue is really just, if we're going to have this visual signifier that you can't do anything outside the layout builder, we also need signifiers for people who aren't using vision to indicate that they're not supposed to click outside of there.
So just to be clear, the grayed out and the disabling around it, I think, is what we're getting pushback from accessibility.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. We're getting pushback from accessibility that this is also bad for sighted users as well.
So it's a bad thing to use this overlay, you mean?
That's the pushback we're getting, yes. If we can go over the next comment on the call if people want to read the pushback that we're getting.
Okay.
I mean, I think one of the pushback is that, like, if you disable the outside area, and then but your site is set up that you have set a menu up on the left, where if somebody's at any point in the site, they can always access this menu to get away from where they are. But now we've disabled that, then we've basically taken away the way that people can sort of always navigate if they get to a place that they didn't want to be.
So how would it be accessible, the best accessible, how would it look like, the best accessible solution? I mean, do we know any other UI that actually does it? Do we have any pattern reference for it? I mean, I can't think on any other solution. Doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It's just that I can't think on it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing I could think of is just a big, thick ass blue border around the content area, or some cheesy thing like that, which is like, it doesn't imply a modal, it doesn't imply a dialogue. You can still click on links. It just directs you to try to, you know, click on the thing that we want you to.
Yeah.
But I don't think that that would be nearly as effective at stopping people from doing the wrong thing. On the other hand, I don't disagree with any of Andrew's points here. So,
No,
I mean,
of course.
yeah. So I think, Emily, your question was, is this a stable blocker or not? So I think given the accessibility concerns, we can't make it a stable blocker. I guess we're going to have to see how users do in the field, though, not having visual guidance on what parts of the page they can manipulate. Hopefully they'll learn it pretty fast, you know, like it's one of those things where you're going to be very fucking frustrated the first time you use this, but then by the third time you kind of got it down. So hopefully that's fine. But yeah, I guess if there is a way of, you know, I defer to designers, but if there is a way to give a visual affordance that is just visual and doesn't like run aground of like, I think Andrew's main concerns is that this is running aground of an existing pattern we have, which is dialogues, and that comes with a whole bunch of baggage attached to it. So if we can come up with something that doesn't have a whole lot of baggage attached to it, I feel like it is better from the user perspective for them to understand that when they edit a layout that only affects a portion of the page and not the entirety of the page. I still think that's important information to communicate. So if it's possible, another round of design could get us there. That would be awesome. But I think we should not make this current design a stable blocker for sure, because it sounds like this is going to add weeks and possibly a waste of time, because his first sentence is like, basically, it's a no-go, you know? So then you have to work against it's a no-go, which is not what you want to do when you're trying to get something to stable. So, and when you weigh that one little bit of annoyance of like, users are going to be initially confused about why they can't edit the header image against everybody who wants to do a layout in Drupal right now on production has to either ping a developer to do it or set up some gauntlet of panels and etc. I think it's worth not making this a stable blocker myself. Does anyone else disagree with that or have any other thoughts?
I like what you said a few minutes before about the save button, that it's a little bit hidden. It's not where you would expect it. I think you said that. It's actually what I thought when you said it. It's kind of weird. Of course, it's not a stable blocker or anything, just a small feedback that it's strange having it there in the top, just below the tabs.
Yeah, the reason that's not in the toolbar, it's probably another one of those like, yeah, 75 different blocking issues, and then we could add it to the toolbar. It's just like
that is what
pretty much that. Okay,
that problem is.
Yeah, that would be a much more intuitive place to put it, I think. But
I had a quick question. Who is the audience of the layout builder? Like, is this a general content editor or content creator that's coming here?
Mm-hmm.
In my experience as a site builder, if anything on the page has a different behavior than is expected, and it's like a substantial, like this is that grayed out area is a relatively large portion of the page, it will create a significant amount of confusion in users, because there literally is no knowledge that they would inherently have that that's the way it behaves. I don't think it's very intuitive. I don't think it should be a stable blocker, because I think that, again, as Angie and everyone else has pointed out, that if accessibility is saying no, then it's not good to set the layout builder for failure. But I would expect that if we called this stable, there would be a lot of people who'd go, what? When they tried to use it. And this is content creators specifically would get confused.
Yeah, that's my concern too, is it seems like it's buggy when,
yes.
when you don't realize what, because you're like, okay, great, I'm editing the layout first. I want to move this header image. Wait, click, it's not working. Click, click. What is wrong? Oh, Drupal is dumb. I hate it. You know what I mean? Versus if you know going into using that interface that it's only for the middle part of the page, then that is a much better, which is why I guess I would be fine saying this is not a stable blocker, but I would really strongly encourage the team to try and do another round of ideation around how we could provide a visual affordance that does not run aground of accessibility concerns.
Yeah, if I didn't have this conversation to reference, as a site builder, if I ran into this, I'd be opening tickets in the issue queue. I would be thinking this is a bug.
But if we decide it's not a stable blocker, then when can it be implemented? Because you were saying just a little while ago, Angie, that once we declare it stable, people are going to be documenting it, making screenshots, yada, yada. So how could we ever introduce something like this?
Well, I mean, the idea would be it would be a usability bug fix, and we can do bug fixes anytime. It's just awesome to do that to people. You know what I mean? Like to make a dramatic visual change to an interface that is already well documented. But we do it, you know what I mean? We've done it in the past. Like we've completely changed the location of certain menu items, things like that. Like we can do it. It's just best to be avoided if we can.
I would tie it to a point release personally. If we were to have something that...
Yeah, we would not do it during a patch release at all. It would be during one of the minor releases that we'd make a change like that. And there'd be a change log about it in the, whatever those things are called. And a release notes note about it and stuff like that. But it's just much better, much better if the thing looks how you want it by the end than trying to introduce visual changes, especially like changing, the color of a button here or there is not that big of a deal, but changing the entire way the interface looks, like the primary interface, ideally we would not do that after we call it stable, unless we're doing major uplifting to it.
But it sounds like this may be a 6-month thing to hash out anyway. So by not making it a stable blocker, we're just essentially setting up the actual fix to go in place for 8.8 rather than with 8.7.
Or 9, yes.
Or 9, yeah.
In future time. Gabor, you've been quiet and you're also a product manager. Do you have any...
Yeah, I was looking at like this, what happens to yeah, I don't know where that went. Yeah, this one. So this is what happens with Quick Edit, is that it basically highlights all the individual items.
Yeah.
Which is, because we already have the areas identified with Layout Builder, and then Ted sent in this quick CSS thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's just adding a border in the Chrome inspector to the outside area.
Yeah. I mean, that, obviously that could look more fancy, but that's basically what I was saying, is then that is, and assuming that only showed up when you hit, edit layout or however you got here, it would be a stark visual thing that would be like, oh, okay. It would help clue people in. Because if that is gone, I mean, this screenshot is only that area, so it's a little harder to tell here. But if that outline is gone, or any kind of visual indicator, then it's really tough to understand in the larger context of things what you can and can't edit. That's my concern anyway. Not having tested it with a user or anything, but just having been yelled at a lot by people. Just feel like I'm getting the spidey sense that I'm going to get yelled at about this by people. So anyway.
Okay, so if we think it's not an
yeah, I think the current solution, I think the issue itself is not a stable blocker. The current solution sounds like it's a could have, but solving the title of the issue would be a strong should have for stable, if that makes sense.
Okay, and it sounds like this could maybe benefit by some usability testing to see what content editors would expect out of this.
If that's feasible, yeah, I mean, that's always great. I hate to put that in front of anyone as like a gate or anything like that, because it's tricky to, not everyone has resources to pull that off.
Yeah, mostly, I think if it's not a stability blocker, it might be a good idea to do that before we get a design pushed in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know who's going to do it, but yes, it would be wonderful if usability people flitted down from the heavens and decided to test this for us. I guess the disadvantage, though, is that then if we do have actual data from usability tests that this does confuse the shit out of people, then it will definitely become a stable blocker. Versus right now, we're kind of going off feelings, and we're like, well, probably doesn't need to be a stable blocker. But yeah. Anyway, my preference would be, you know, spend 2 hours seeing if there's a CSS only solution to this problem that doesn't make the interface look like shit. And if there is, see if we can get away with that, since it doesn't have all the baggage attached that turning it into a pseudo dialogue does. And then if accessibility pushes back again against it, then I would just be like, fine, leave it. But I really think it would be worth another go at this, because the issue itself is very important to, you know, to prevent false bug reports, to prevent, you know, frustrated content authors, that kind of thing. But I would not make it a stable blocker knowing what I know now about all the concerns, I guess. So I can write something to this effect up in the issue for you, so that that's logged.
Okay, that would be great. Thanks. Okay, thanks everyone for the feedback.
Yay. Sorry for the meeting taking long, but that seemed like kind of important. So.
All right. Well, in that case, thanks everyone for covering. I said it's going to be a lot of issues, and it was. So thanks everyone for the feedback, and keep up the great work.
Yay.
Have a nice week.
Thanks.
Right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.